Welcome to the TikTok Podcast, a place for real conversations about Lyme disease and tick-borne illness. Hosted by Christina Murphy, Lyme advocate, educator, and vice president of the LEAF program. This podcast brings together patients, doctors, researchers, and families, working to change how Lyme is understood, treated, and prevented. These are the stories, the science, and the voices driving awareness forward.
Welcome to Everything Frederick Live. This is Awareness Frederick TikToks. I'm Christina Murphy, and we would like to welcome the wonderful, fabulous Fred Diamond, who has written 2 books and has his own company with Insights for Business. I just want to thank you, Fred, for joining me this morning. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. It's great to see you again as well. I see you frequently, as you know, on social media, and it's good to see you quasi-live here.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't stay still for very long. I have to keep putting the word out there.
Well, you're doing a great job doing that.
Well, thank you, sir. I wanted to invite you to talk with us because I'm absolutely fascinated in your drive and not only being such a guru in business, but how that has worked into your life when Lyme happened. I guess the very first thing that I want to ask, and I hope this will be too close to the heart, was what was the first moment when you realized that there was something medical going on? Because in a lot of couples, we hear about the tragedies of people splitting up because there isn't an understanding of what's going on. So I'm going to hand this over to you and let you tell us the experience and from your knowledge base, what do people need to be aware of in a couple situation with Lyme and the tick bite situation?
Absolutely. Well, once again, my name is Fred Diamond. I'm based in Northern Virginia, right outside of DC in Fairfax, not too far from you. And I've been very fortunate to have come up to Frederick a couple of times to do book signings. And I was there for the launch of The Quiet Epidemic and did some book signings. And I love coming up to that part of Maryland and the DC area. I wrote a book called Love, Hope, Lyme: What Family Members, Partners, and Friends Who Love a Chronic Lyme Survivor Need to Know. And I also started a podcast of the same name, the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast, which we post a show every other Monday. One of your good friends, the great Dr. Nancy Fox, was one of my first guests, and was very fortunate to have had her early on in the show. And also another doctor, Dr. Greg Lee, who's not too far from you as well, was a very popular guest on the show as well. Briefly, I had a spouse who had Lyme disease, and about 5 years ago, she said she needed to focus 100% on her recovery. And I realized that I thought I knew a lot about Lyme disease, and I realized that I needed to learn more. So in the late spring of 2021, I read everything I could on Lyme disease, bought every book on Amazon, joined a bunch of Facebook groups, and met people like you, went to various Lyme support entities. And the thing I realized, Christina, was I didn't know maybe 5% of what there is to know. And, like I said, I had someone in my life who had Lyme, and I basically said, go figure out how to treat yourself and and I'll be here to support whatever it is that you determine is the right course of treatment. When I got deep into it, I realized that, like I said, I knew maybe 5% what there was to know. For instance, I didn't know that there were co-infections. And for people who don't understand that term, basically, the tick can transmit up to as many as 30 additional comorbidities. Some of them are horrible in their own right, like Bartonella and Babesia and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And, obviously, many more of these than I do. Each one of them comes with its own treatment protocol, its own symptoms, and its own effects on the body. But I just thought, okay, Lyme disease. Okay, what do we need to do to treat Lyme disease? Second thing is, like, even simple things. I didn't know that there was a class of doctor called Lyme literate medical doctor. People who are acknowledged as knowing more about how to go about treating. I didn't know that there were organizations such as LEAF, one of the organizations that you're involved with, and ILADS, the infectious disease and associated disease, or Lyme and associated, I can't even remember, ILADS, International Lyme and Associated Disease Society.
Yeah.
Yep. And the Center for Lyme Action, which lobbies on Capitol Hill,
Right.
and Global Lyme Alliance. And there's a couple dozen and very, very small ones that help people get micro loans to treat at various times. So there's a lot to know. It's a very, very complex disease, and it's because you were bitten by a tick.
Right.
That is pretty much why you get Lyme disease. Maybe I've spoken to people who've gotten bitten by a spider, but you didn't smoke 4 packs of cigarettes a day.
Right.
You didn't do things that would cause harm to your body. You were hiking in the Appalachian Trail, or you were riding a kayak in the Ozarks, or, Christina, you were walking in Central Park. I've spoken to people who were bitten all over the country, all over the world for that matter. So it's a very complex disease, and you need to understand how it can play out.
Okay. All right. With your business experience, what makes a message about the information about Lyme, alpha-gal, anaplasmosis from ticks and 8 other different species of vectors land with people so that they actually understand?
Well, I would say there's 2 sides to it. One is obviously the prevention side, and you and Dr. Fox have done a great job educating parents and children about how they should protect themselves from getting bitten by a tick. And actually, that's the number way of prevention, is just don't get bitten by a tick.
Right.
Or if you find a tick, take quick action. So there's that. And, if you're going out in the woods, if you're going hiking, if you're going kayaking, whatever it might be, to wear high socks, to wear clothes that covers your body. And then secondly, I've had people who have done that and a tick still found their way inside their body. So fortuitously, if you're a parent or you live with someone and you've been in that type of situation, to get your body checked. Now, one of the tricky things is we know about ticks is that they're very small, but not that they're very small. They don't sting, right? Like a mosquito or a bee, they bite. And I don't know, Christina, I've seen stats that say 60 to 70% of the people didn't even know that they were bitten by a tick. A lot of people think that the telltale sign is the bullseye rash, which it is, but I've heard as many as half the people who've been diagnosed with Lyme either never saw the bullseye rash, or, the tick bit them in a private area, or in their on their head, underneath their hair, or in their back. If you live by yourself and you get bitten by a tick on the back, obviously you're not going to see anything. And then unfortunately, a couple of weeks later, some of the symptoms come.
Right. The other thing, a friend of mine, her husband presented with having like 26 different rashes all up and down from his neck to his ankles. I mean, it's different for every person. Everybody's biology is different, and you're right. It just it's individualized Oh, I got that word out.
But we're at the point now, though, in history. Again, you and I are doing today's interview in January of 2026. RFK Jr., the director, the Secretary for Health and Human Services, just had an event about a month ago called the Lyme Roundtable on
Right.
Capitol Hill, and
Right.
they had 2 sessions, and they had very prominent panelists talking about various aspects of Lyme. And it's at the point now, Christina, where medical practitioners must be aware, right?
Right.
When I first met you, so many people said to me that they had gone to 10, 15, 20, 30 doctors
Absolutely.
before they were officially diagnosed with Lyme, because it represents itself as maybe as many as 12 to 25 additional or other types of diseases.
Right.
Arthritis, of course, is the most common, because the tick bacteria, or the Lyme bacteria, I should say, is shaped like a corkscrew. It digs into soft tissue, so it can go into your joints, is one of the first places where it goes. So it looks like, to the uneducated medical practitioner, as arthritis. So some of them will start treating you for joint pain or arthritis when in fact it's Lyme, and then
Right.
flu-like symptoms when in fact it's Lyme. So many people, unfortunately, go through months, in some cases years, in some cases decades, where they're not properly diagnosed.
It is a corkscrew. It can also go across the blood-brain barrier,
Yep.
which is a little frightening. So along its travels, it'll hit the heart and then the blood-brain barrier. Um, in your experience, how do people react when you try to explain this to them? I know what my experiences are, but I have to make sure that my community in Frederick is aware of this is a 51-year-old problem that wasn't taken seriously. And I want them to understand from other people from different places who have experienced this, to say that this is factual, and don't be surprised by the experiences you have. So if you can fill that in, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah. So it is real. And I speak to a lot of people. I like to joke that I knew one person with Lyme 4 years ago, and now I've spoken to thousands, if not tens of thousands. And my
Absolutely.
book, Love, Hope, Lyme, it's available on Amazon, but I give away the PDF for free. So I've given away, I don't know, over 5,000 copies of the PDF. So Lyme has, and I'm not shy when I'm talking in the business world, I almost always, maybe 90%, 95% of the time, I'll let people know that also I'm very, very knowledgeable on Lyme disease.
Right.
And usually people will say one of two things. I've heard of Lyme disease. And I'll say to them, are you very aware of it or just familiar with it? And in most cases, maybe they'll know somebody, right? Maybe a coworker's daughter, or, a sister-in-law or something like that, who might have had, diagnosed. And they'll always say the same thing. It's terrible. I know they've gone through a lot of challenges, and I've met people who haven't been able to work, for a decade, because the brain fog. And once it crosses the blood-brain barrier, which doesn't happen to everybody, but it happens, unfortunately, to many people, you get the brain fog. You can't work. You have horrible anxiety, suicidal ideations, and those are real. Those are 100% real. I've done about 75 podcasts as of now, and I would say at least 15 are on the neurological side and the psychiatric side, to let people know that, as they say, there was a documentary that came out, I'm not crazy. You're not crazy. You have Lyme. Once it gets the bacteria, and there's also some of the co-infections are parasitic as well. Once they cross the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain, they can cause things like personality change, short-term memory loss, long-term memory loss. I did a show on Lyme rage, which is probably more appropriately titled Bartonella rage, which is a bacteria that causes horrible challenges once it gets into the brain. So we've all been spending a lot of time trying to let people know that this is a real thing. Unfortunately, there have been places that have denied that chronic Lyme exists. And that's very, very unfortunate. It's because the Infectious Disease Society of America has said that if you have Lyme, you should be treating it with 3 to 4 weeks of antibiotics, and that should cure Lyme. And if you have any symptoms after that, you have something called post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome. So the Centers for Disease Control adopted that, put that in as the definition for what's called chronic Lyme. And people who would Google would see chronic Lyme doesn't exist. Lyme is treatable within 3 weeks with antibiotics. And there's been some positive movement towards getting that shifted. Unfortunately, it still hasn't happened. So there is still a lot of ignorance that what people call chronic Lyme disease does not exist. If you have symptoms after 3 to 4 weeks of antibiotics, then it might be psychiatric, or you may be a very, very small part of the community. The National Association for Science, Engineering, and Medicine came out with a beautiful report towards the end of 2025, talking about new ways to verbalize what happens once Lyme becomes quote unquote chronic. So there's movement happening, and hopefully it'll continue. It'll happen a lot quicker.
Right. Thank you for that. And so people will know, Bartonella back in the 70s and 80s was quantified as cat scratch fever. And a lot of women, when they would get pregnant, would be tested for Bartonella and cat scratch fever. When I was pregnant with my son, I was diagnosed with Bartonella. So, ladies, when you get pregnant, make sure you share that with your husband. Okay. That's the only warning I can give. And the parasite disease is called the babesiosis. So just adding that in there.
Yep.
I'm just shooting from the hip today, Fred. I had a plethora of questions, as you know, because I've talked to you before about that. And my husband just said, just talk from the heart, which usually ends up the best way of doing things. I am eternally grateful for your book, because having this come out from the caregiver's point of view is infinitely a treasure.
Thank you.
For all of us that have the disease. We can't articulate as well as someone that has all of their cognitive abilities sometimes. So I wanted to give you my gratitude for this. The other thing that I want to do is, if you're going to, of course, I want to blend your business mind in this because of what you do. What would you tell the public right now? I mean, straight from the hip, the heart. What awareness, tips, knowledge, what would you tell them?
First of all, I'll tell them to read my book. And first of all, thank you very much for those very kind words. Like I mentioned, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll have 10 messages on my phone from people around the world asking questions, looking for resources, asking for advice. And again, I'm not a doctor. I have a history degree and I have an MBA.
Mhm.
So, I don't give medical advice. I just realized when this happened to me, when this person in my life said they needed to leave our relationship to treat themselves to recover, I just dove in just to understand how complex this disease was. And like most people who don't have a chronic illness or something like this, you just think that things are solvable, right? Go to the doctor. Our Western medicine will have a solution for everything. And what I've discovered about Lyme is that it's very complex. We talked about the co-infection, but there's also genetic concerns. There's also, I hate to say this, but trauma that you've experienced in your life. I remember I was listening to a webinar by Dr. Richard Horowitz, who's one of the foremost Lyme Lyme literate medical doctors. He actually wrote the foreword to my book. Right. This was in the summer of 2021. And he did a webinar for the Pennsylvania Lyme Support Network. And I was watching it, and I had just read both of his books. So I knew 95% of what he was talking about. At the 59th minute of a 1-hour webinar, Christina, he said, and oh, by the way, if you haven't resolved unresolved childhood trauma, you're never going to recover from chronic illness. Right. And I was like, oh, well, that's a big thing to know. And he said, right. Thank you very much. Good night. And he was actually the first guest on my Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. Dr. Nancy Fox was my second guest. And I asked him about that. And I said, that's a pretty important thing to know. And he's treated, I don't know, tens of thousands of patients. And he said he was shocked at how many of them had some type of trauma that they haven't resolved. And one of the real traumas, of course, is you get this disease. Maybe you go 5, 7, 8 years without it being official. Maybe you suspect it because you've done research and, you see symptoms, etc. But then finally a doctor says to you, I think you have Lyme disease. So you're like, after 6, 7 years of dealing with the pain and the stress and the brain fog and unresolved rage and whatever it might be, someone finally says it's Lyme disease. So you're like, wow, good, I have Lyme disease. Well, for a lot of people, that's where the war trauma starts, because you just don't take a pill, right?
Right.
There used to be, it was just pound away with antibiotics. I've learned over the last 10, 15 years, herbals and various supplements. As a matter of fact, when I interviewed people as I was writing my book, I spoke to people who went to Peru to experience obscure hallucinogens, which they believe has helped them recover. And then I talk to people who say, you have to also understand the mind and meditate and gratitude and, get your mindset into the right place to be able to heal. For people who are listening, who are caregivers, I just thought, okay, go find a doctor who's going to give you a prescription. You take it for a couple of weeks, you rest, and you'll be fine. That ain't the case for people who are listening, who are caregivers. It's so complex. And the other thing too, and I'm sure you've experienced this, and is when you're, it's the expression, you don't know what it is until you get it, and you don't want to get it. Right. So I've kind of, I didn't plan, it was funny. I didn't plan 4 years ago to become an expert on a mysterious disease and write a book. I've actually gotten clients in my business who have seen my book and have reached out to me and said they wanted to talk to me. And I remember once I had my customers are VPs of sales at big companies, typically B2B, business to business. I had a prospect that I've been trying to get as a customer, as a client for years. One day he reached out to me and I was like, great. And he says, what is all this? We got on a Zoom call. He said, what is all this that you're doing about Lyme disease? And I told him my story. And he said, well, I have a 32-year-old son who has chronic Lyme. He hasn't left his room in 3 years. He used to be an athlete. He can't work anymore. We've taken him to this doctor and this doctor. And I was very empathetic to what he was going through. And then at the last 10 minutes, he said, all right, tell me more about the Institute for Effective Professional Selling. And I was like, okay, well, here's what we're doing. Here's our women in sales program. He said, all right, the timing is right for us to become a member. But like I
Wonderful.
said, yeah, I think it was very nice. But if I didn't present myself as being this empathetic expert on Lyme disease, yeah, he probably never would have become a customer. But I didn't become an empathetic expert on Lyme disease to get customers. Something happened in my life that I'm still trying to be honest with you, to figure out. I heard once, I wrote an article for LymeDisease.org in the summer of 2021 called How to Be Supportive When Your Partner Has Lyme. And that's what got the ball rolling, and 1,000 people connected and reached out. And I spoke to someone who said to me, she believes that 75% of relationships will end if chronic Lyme is involved. And 90% of the time, it's because the spouse says, I'm out of here.
Right.
You're not who you were. You're always on the couch. You can't work anymore. I just went to the Center for Disease Control website, and it says you need to take 3 weeks of antibiotics and you should be cured. Well, you've been saying this for 4 years now. So I just, when I realized all these things, it's just a horrible disease that no human should have to endure. So I know my book has touched a lot of people, and hopefully it's touching more and more caregivers to understand that your partner, your friend, your lover, your child, they didn't choose. There's no one on the planet, if they knew, would choose to have Lyme disease. So, but it happened through no fault of their own. Now you, as the caregiver, this is someone you love. You need to be empathetic. You need to understand more things. And, I wrote the book to be read in an hour and a half. Right. There are some books that are like 2 inches wide. That wasn't the goal. It was to be read. It was to be referred to. And, kindly, I've met thousands of people like you who are also devoting their time and energy to educating, to bringing awareness. Congratulations to you on getting behind a microphone. To take, you put yourself out there and you hold events. And like I said, I've been to a couple of them, and it's a mysterious disease. Hopefully it's coming more and more into the mainstream. Hopefully more and more doctors, they should be aware of it. Right. With AI, hopefully that'll help a lot, where people can put symptoms, into a GPT, and Lyme may come up to the top. So we're hoping for a lot of good things to happen in the future.
Absolutely. So that kind of sums things up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert the fact that with Lyme disease, one of the percentages that is out there is that 30% of the Lyme patients are children. So when a spouse gets Lyme disease, you really do need to check the children, because without knowing if a child is acting out differently, or if they're having physical problems or problems in school, I think that they need to be tested for vector-borne diseases. Also, in the mental arena, I wrote a book called Embracing Healing, a 30-day program, which is a program to slow your mind through reading 2 sentences and then coloring, because coloring shuts the brain off, and the act of coloring brings those 2 sentences to fill your mind and go to the subliminal. It is scientifically proven, and that helps to bring people out of PTSD or depression or white coat syndrome. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Fred, because the emotional part of this is a psychiatric part is something I think that people don't take more of a look at, and especially when it's happening to if a couple's coming apart and there's children involved, 30% say, okay, the city of Frederick is 17,000 populace. That's the amount of people in the state of Maryland that have Lyme disease. So take 30% of that, and that's your children. So with these facts, and thank you for, cueing me, because I so want to protect our community. So I'm going to let you take it out because you're the pro. And you can give everybody your information, where to find your book, Love, Hope, and Lyme. And I want everybody to know that you can find this interview with Fred Diamond on Everything Frederick Live. And we are Awareness Frederick TikToks. So take it away, Fred.
No, that's great. As you were mentioning the name of my book, I was originally going to call it Love, Loss, Lyme. And alliteration aside, I just realized, I just saw a community that lost so many things. I've met people who couldn't work for a decade, and relationships, because of just getting bitten by a tick. So I just want to thank you again and acknowledge you for, I see you all over the place, how hard you work, and, the awareness that you're bringing and the suggestions that you're bringing. So thank you. And thank you for that. And thank you for having me. It's interesting, when I first published the book, and it's up on Amazon. If people want to purchase copies, it's very easy to find. Someone reached out to me and said, it's such an expensive disease as well. It's not covered by insurance once it gets into the chronic stage. So, you have to pay out of pocket. There's not that many Lyme literate doctors, so it's very expensive when you find someone. So I decided, you know what? I'm not here to make money. I'm not making any money. So I make the PDF available for free. You could find me on Facebook. I'm very active on LinkedIn on the business side. Love to talk to people. Matter of fact, it's 11 o'clock right now on the East Coast. I've already had 3 conversations, not including this one, about Lyme disease and related tick-borne diseases. So just let people know that it's real, and continue finding solutions. And I'm very easy to find if you want to reach out to me. So thank you again for making this available.
You're very welcome. Anytime. Oh,
All right.
We're going to be doing a race up here in Frederick in May 30th. So if you're around, bring your book.
Absolutely. I'm actually doing a couple of the Lyme Warrior 5Ks, both of those weekends. So I look forward to it as well.
Fantastic.
All right. Thanks again, Christina.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
You've been listening to the TikTok podcast, hosted by Christina Murphy. If this episode informed, inspired, or helped you better understand Lyme disease, take a moment to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your support helps these conversations reach the families and communities who need them most. As always, you can watch all past episodes on the Everything Frederick Live YouTube channel.